Aloha and welcome to our video on speciation. In this video we are going to describe methods scientists use to classify things. We'll talk a little bit about Charles Darwin and his speciation theories and some causes of speciation. We'll distinguish between the biological and ecological species concepts, and then finally we'll look over some different types of speciation. So it's pretty much human nature to want to classify things. Living things are no different. Scientists have been trying to classify them forever by joining the like groups together and such like that. What we've noticed is over time, our ability to classify things has changed. Initially, it was done purely on physical looks and what looked alike we thought to be related, and later we developed different ways of testing things, and primarily now we'll use a lot of genetic comparison to determine these relationships. But as you can see, the classifying of living things is a very important goal of science. And remember, science is trying to make sense of the world, so if we can put things together into groups, it makes it easier to talk and study about these things. Now, as always, when we talk about evolution, we always seem to talk about Darwin. And Darwin had a really interesting observation in the Galapagos Island. He was looking at finches. And the Galapagos Islands, you can see them, they're down here, they're off the coast of South America. And they're kind of too far for a bird to simply fly from South America to the Galapagos and back. Okay, it was a little bit of a distance there, so they couldn't really just take off from the coast, fly out to the islands for a little while, and then come back. So it was kind of a big distance. What Darwin assumed was that one of these finches, the ancestral finch per se, was sitting here on the mainland and was flying and got swept up in a storm or something and was blown out to sea and managed to find the island and land. Now, once on the land, it had to find food, it had to find shelter, and because there were different food sources, what we notice is if you look at, here's just 4 of them, but if you look at the difference in the beaks, you can see that these birds have developed these characteristics to allow them to exploit a new type of food source. Okay, so you could have a multi-purpose feeder like this one down here. You could have one that goes after insects and holes because he has a more pointed nose here, and then you have one here that could open up big, thick, heavy seeds. So this variation in what they fed off of allowed them to differentiate amongst themselves, and that's probably how this speciation occurred. And what they found is on different islands there were different food sources, and that's why there's different populations of finches on all the different islands. Okay, when we're talking about speciation, we have to understand what a species is. And there's 2 different concepts that I want to go over with you in the video today. The first is the biological species concept. And the biological species concept says that a species is a group of organisms that are able to reproduce, and their offspring are able to reproduce as well. So a group of donkeys is a species because if you take 2 of those donkeys and they reproduce, the offspring, the baby donkey that they have, will be able to reproduce as well. And the same is true with horses. Now, donkeys and horses kind of look alike, so what would happen if they were put together in a species? Could they breed? And in fact they can, and when a donkey and a horse are bred, the result is a mule. Unfortunately for the mule, they're not able to have offspring. So a mule makes it, even though that the donkey and the horse have the ability to breed together, their offspring's not able to reproduce, and that's what separates these 2 into 2 different species. So now that we know what a biological species is, let's take a look at ecological species. So biological species dealt with the biology of reproduction. Ecological species deal with a niche. And what they say is that for an organism or a group of organisms to be a species, they have to exploit a single niche. They all share that single niche together. So the key aspects of the definition are the resources exploited and the habitat occupied. So what is it doing in there? What's its role? How does it fit into nature? Where does it live? And that's kind of how we define a species. So even though we have 2 ecological species, those 2 species could in fact breed together and have viable offspring, but they're separated. For instance, if I had a population over here and I had another population over here, I could have 2 different species because they explore 2 different niches, even though if we were to take some of both of these and put them together, they could breed. So it's not real easy to define what a species is. We kind of know what it is, But to break it down to the hardcore definition, something to stick to, is where we run into a little bit of problem in science. So if we understand what a species is, but we have a problem defining it, the reason that could be is because how speciation occurs. And I want to show you just a couple real quick simple examples of how this works. The easiest one that we see a lot of is this one here, this allopatric speciation. And notice in all of our examples, we're going to start off with an original population, and then something's going to happen. So for allopatric, what we get is a barrier formation, and this could be a mountain range could pop up, or it could be a river, or it could be an island splitting into two, or it could just be simply a population of animals getting lost and separating themselves by a physical barrier. Once they're separated, we'll notice that if conditions were the same as they were, there's no change. But if we have something new kind of a condition here, then we start seeing natural selection take over. And we start seeing different traits favored, and those different traits become more prevalent, and eventually we get into speciation. And then we'll end up with our two species that even if we take away that barrier, we still end up with our two distinct species. So allopatric means that there's a physical barrier that is formed. Now, the opposite of that would be sympatric. And sympatric, again, we start here, but notice here, we're noticing that we have genetic polymorphism. What that means is two distinctly different variants. And over time, there's no separation between the two. We have our two different populations there, but they're in the same location. There's just some kind of a selective pressure on these individuals that makes them choose there as opposed to here. So it could be a color variant, or it could be a size variant, whatever the case may be, but we're having a choice, a selection of this one here. So we form out a new population, a new species within the same geographic range. And then, as you can see, they're already here together. So when they blend together, we're going to see that we have two distinctly different species. Now, we can see some different ones here. Peripatric and parapatric, what we're looking at is going into a new niche, okay? And then it can either be isolated or not, becomes behavioral. Okay, so allopatric is going to be geographical separation. Sympatric will be more behavioral separation. And you can kind of see that it can be a little bit the same as well. Okay, so that's it for our video. As always, the lessons will go into a little more detail. Good luck with the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video.